Hello and welcome once again to the Tobago House of Assembly's Division of Education, Innovation and Energy's e-learning program. Today we're going to be looking again at our communication studies, and my name is Kimarie Richardson Thomas and I'll be your facilitator. When you do your exams for communication studies, you module 1, paper 2. There are times when you're going to be asked in that question for that essay to comment on the reliability or the validity of the information presented. But what is reliability? What is validity? Reliability speaks about the consistency with which a method measures something. How consistent is it? It actually can be broken down and you're looking at who is collecting it or who's involved and where is it. Can you trust who is providing the information? Is the place that the information coming from a consistent type of source? Or is it that if it changes, then your content and your results will change? Validity looks at the accuracy with which a method measures what it is intended to measure. We are looking at the when and the what. The validity is talking about when was it collected? Can you trust the collection of it based on how long ago it was done? What was actually collected? Does the information that was collected, is it relatable to what you're looking at now? And we're going to look at this in some more detail if we're going to compare reliability and validity. So we take a look at a comparison. Reliability. What does it tell you? Reliability tells us the extent to which the results can be reproduced when the research is repeated under the same conditions. Validity would tell you the extent to which the results really measure what they're supposed to measure. How is it assessed? Reliability is assessed by checking the consistency of results across time, across different observers, across parts of the test itself. So you can assess the reliability of a test if you did it today and you use the same methodology next month. Are you able to get the same results? You use the same methodology next year. Are you able to get the same results? That will tell you that your test is reliable. If you take a thermometer and you give it to 3 different doctors and they're testing the temperature of one patient, all 3 doctors should get the same or close to the same results because we understand that a thermometer is a reliable tool for measuring body temperature. Validity is assessed by checking how well the results correspond to established theories and other measures of the same concept. You want to be able to see if existing data collection theories, when you test your research against these theories, you're able to assess that it corresponds, it measures up. How do they relate? Simply put, a reliable measurement is not always valid. The results might be reproducible, but they're not necessarily correct. So it may not always be valid even though it's reliable. You can trust it, but it may not work under another situation. Validity. A valid measure is generally reliable. If something is valid, you can rely on it. If a test produces accurate results, then they should be reproducible. So let's see how this works. Reliability. You are conducting research on garbage disposal practices in your community. Which of the following would be reliable data sources? If you are looking at information regarding garbage disposal practices in your community, you want to be able to have data sources or participants who are familiar with the garbage collection processes in the community and who are part of the community. They either visit the community for that purpose or they live there. When we look at the options, the Prime Minister, would the Prime Minister be a reliable data source? Probably not, because he may not be collecting the garbage in your community. If your Prime Minister lives in your community, however, that may present a different slant. But if he does not, he may not be a reliable data source. Residents in the community, if they live within the community, they are in a very good position to give information about the garbage disposal practices within the community. So the residents in the community would be a good source. Persons in neighboring communities, they would be living outside of your community. Their garbage disposal practices may be different. Your garbage disposal, so you may have persons coming to collect your garbage on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. But people outside of your community or in neighboring communities may have theirs on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So their experience would be quite different from yours. Books on garbage disposal. Books on garbage disposal would be secondary sources. And if you're conducting the research, you're looking here for primary data sources. You're looking for primary data sources, and books on garbage disposal will not speak specifically to your community. Community sanitation workers. Well, if they're the sanitation workers within your community, they are in a very good position to provide information about garbage disposal practices in your community. They can tell you probably where they collect the largest amount of garbage on a weekly basis. They can tell you probably even the kinds of garbage that's collected within the community, and they would be an excellent source. Anyone in your country? No. Anyone in your country, any and everybody in your country would not be able to relate to what is going on in your community. Internet articles on garbage disposal, again, those will be sources of secondary data collection, but they will not speak specifically to your community. So if you're talking about reliable data sources, we're talking here about residents in the community and community sanitation workers being reliable data sources. So let's talk about validity. You are conducting research on the experiences of COVID-19 patients in Trinidad and Tobago. Which of the following would be valid data sources? So when we look at validity, you want to be able to have data sources that are now, that would speak to the current situation. So information from Trinidad and Tobago Customs and Immigration officers over the last 20 years. While our customs and immigration officers may be able to tell us who is coming in and if any of them may have had COVID, if it's looking at the last 20 years, it may not be quite valid because COVID-19 is a recent pandemic. It's a recent illness. And the information from the last 20 years would not be valid for this situation under investigation. Interviews with COVID-19 survivors in Trinidad and Tobago. This would be valid because you're hearing from persons who would have experienced the disease, the virus itself. These persons who would have survived it, they can tell you about their experience. And we know that once we are talking about COVID-19 survivors, we are not talking about any individual beyond, let's say, November 2019. Data on the numbers of persons who contracted the flu in 2018. While the coronavirus is a type of, or the flu is also a type of coronavirus, we know that the novel coronavirus that we speak of, the COVID-19, is a different type of virus. It is not an ordinary flu, and it's something that came upon the global, what we want to say, attention. It became on the global stage late 2019. So we're not looking for information in 2018. It's not going to be valid. Records from hospital personnel at the Couva Hospital for the period March to May 2020. This would be valid because these individuals during this period, March to May 2020, at the Couva Hospital, they would have specifically been interacting and engaging with COVID-19 patients. And during this specific period, they can give you information that would be specific to the research being conducted. Reports from hospitals in Jamaica for the period March to May 2020. Now, while it covers the same period that we're looking at, it's looking at a different territory. so that it's not going to be valid for the Trinidad and Tobago experience, even though it's looking at the same period. And these are some of the things that we weigh when we're looking at data sources, valid data sources. Is it applicable to the study under investigation? Now, your Module 1 exam, and we want to just touch on what it is you can expect as you prepare for this exam. Your Module 1 exam will cover Paper 1 content and Paper 2 content. We still have to review and go over Modules 2 and 3, but for the purposes of Module 1, you will have 45 items for your multiple choice. Within the 45, the first 7 will be your listening comprehension, and then you will continue with 12 additional, 12, 4 and 4, 8 additional, 8 to 12 additional that would be specific for Module 1. And then you're going to have your Paper 2 essay that will cover your Module 1 content. So let's see what that involves. For your Paper 1, multiple choice, your first 7 items will be based on listening comprehension. In our first session, we looked at effective listening. We looked at levels of comprehension. And this is where those skills are going to come in very handy. When you're given this question, your 7 questions, areas that you would be expected to focus on would be the writer's main idea. So when you're going to hear an extract that will be read to you twice, you're going to listen carefully, but bear in mind that traditionally, areas that you have to focus on would be to find the main idea of the extract. So it's a good idea going into your exam that you know already. Pay attention to the main idea. You will be given opportunities to jot things down while the reading is, during that reading process. In fact, you're allowed time to make some jottings before, and then after the first reading, you can make some notes before you answer your questions. So know that you have to listen for your main idea. Know that you have to listen out for supporting details. What are those bits of information you're able to listen to that tell you they support the main idea? You will be required to listen out for your literary devices. So review literary devices. Understand how to listen for similes, metaphors, personification, onomatopoeia, hyperbole, aspects of other aspects of literary devices, because there will be examples of them in those first 7 questions. You have to listen out for sensory details, because you can have questions asking about imagery. There will be questions that might be asking about what examples that may have appealed to the sense of sight or the sense of hearing. There may be questions about it in those first 7 questions. You may have questions that talk about the tone or the mood. Be familiar with vocabulary that explain or describe tone and mood for the writer, as well, tone of the writer, mood of the reader. Then you may have questions that talk about the discourse modes. And we looked at modes of discourse in our second session. Is this, and with our modes of discourse, we spoke about pie. Is it persuasive? Is it informative? Is it entertaining? And how can you break it down into other components? What is the discourse mode being used by the writer for that piece that you listen to? So this is a handy tool to go into your exam being aware of, because most of your questions will surround that for the first 7 items in the multiple choice. Then you would have from items 8 to 15 in your paper 1, questions similar to this. So for example, and we just looked at research methods. So here's an example. The Student Council of your school has embarked on a research study in order to determine reasons for the decline in student participation in co-curricular activities at the school. This is a research method question. The first question we can ask, and you're going to get combinations of these types, where they'll present you with a scenario, and then you are going to be required to select the most appropriate answer, the correct answer for the question that you've been presented with. So the most appropriate method of data collection for this type of study, and your options are questionnaire, direct observation, focus group, document research. So if it's the student council looking at reasons for a decline in student participation in co-curricular activities, you want to be able to have a data methodology, a data collection method that would enable you to get as wide a participant group as possible. When we went through the different types of data collection methods, we're able to determine that questionnaire really allows you to get a large number of participants. Direct observation and focus groups give you smaller groups that you can interact with, and document research is a secondary source. What we're looking at here, you want to find a primary data collection source, and one that allows you to get as wide a cross-section of the student population would be your questionnaire. A second question asks, one weakness of conducting interviews as a data collection method is, and we went through advantages and disadvantages of all of the data collection methods. And wherever you see weakness, this is asking for the disadvantage. What is a disadvantage of using interviews as a data collection method? Our options are costly to conduct, limited size of interviewee population, flexibility of the questions, and able to capture verbal and nonverbal language. When we go back to our information on disadvantages of conducting interviews, we're able to determine that a disadvantage is the limited size of the interviewee population. If you're doing interviews, you're not able to use as wide a cross-section of the population. Your sample size will be a lot smaller. So that's the disadvantage if you decide to use interviews for this specific research. Then you have a question like this. The council has decided to use questionnaires to collect data. The most efficient method of administering the questionnaire is face-to-face, via telephone, via conventional mail, or online. Again, it requires you to identify advantages and disadvantages of this particular mode of data collection. If you want to be able to get as many responses as possible from your questionnaire, because one of the disadvantages we identified is that sometimes you have difficulty getting back information from the participants. So that if we want to be able to get as many responses as possible, the most efficient method of us administering the questionnaire will be using the face-to-face method. So that as you give it out, you are able to get your responses, collect your questionnaire, and you have as many responses as you possibly can. And the fourth question says, the research design in this case will be what? Because you want to be able, the Student Council wants to do research to determine reasons for the decline in student participation in co-curricular activities. It will involve, yes, the questionnaires, but questions that would also provide some explanation, that when they sit to do the analysis, they can write out information and collect rich, thick description. What you're going to end up with would be a mixed method. It's not going to be exclusively quantitative. It's not going to be exclusively qualitative either. It's going to be a combination of these two. It's not going to be ethnographic because the student council members are not going to lock all of the students in the school compound for a prolonged period and sit and observe and interact with them. People are going to go home when their maxi taxi reach. Yes. So it's not ethnographic. So then we are seeing that this is an example of mixed method at work. Paper 2. Paper 2, Module 1. These represent the kinds of questions that you will get for the paper 2 module 1 essay. Every time you get the essay, almost every single past paper we've looked at and other samples, you're going to be required to state the writer's main point in no more than 30 words. This is usually the very first thing that you're going to be required to do for this module 1 essay. State the main point, no more than 30 words. After you've done that, you're going to continue your essay because you're going to ask to write an essay in no more than 500 words in which you refer to the writer's purpose. And that writer's purpose, again, is usually a topic. It's usually an area that is given in the exam. Know that when you're going into that exam room, you're going prepared to refer to the writer's purpose. Then you may have to discuss organizational strategies and language techniques. Over the years, we've seen where this has shifted sometimes, where you may have to identify organizational strategies and language techniques, or organizational strategies or language techniques, but you may have one or two or combination, but know that you have to prepare yourselves to discuss these organizational strategies and language techniques. And in our last session, and I'll remind you, our organizational strategies would be like how you would lay out a table if you're going to have a particular type of setting. If you're having a formal dinner, how you lay out that table will be different to if you're having a friendly line, how you're going to lay out your table. The organizational strategies, how are you going to, or how did the writer lay out the information that's being presented? Language techniques would be like the ingredients in the meal. What are those ingredients used that will tell you what kind of meal it is? For language techniques, what are the ingredients, the language techniques that were used in that piece of writing that help guide you to tell you what was the writer's purpose? You may be asked to discuss the writer's tone. What we've seen over the years is sometimes a combination of information that would involve the main point, writer's purpose, organizational strategies and language techniques, and or tone or reliability or validity. There may be a combination of any of these components here, and you would be asked to comment on it, discuss it, evaluate for the purposes of your essay. As we recap what it is we looked at today, today's objectives, we said that students would have been able to determine the appropriateness of data collection methods and instruments, evaluate the effect of primary and secondary sources on the reliability and validity of information, and apply content covered over the last 3 sessions to the Module 1 examination questions. We really want to thank you for tuning in once more as we conclude our Module 1 for Cape Communication Studies. Join me in our next session as we start to explore our Module 2. So once again, thank you for joining us at the Division of Education, Innovation and Energy e-Learning Program. Goodbye.